Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. As I'm sure you guys all know, we just had a crazy and unexpected ban list drop, which is really going to shake up the format. But then again, I think it was much needed. As much as the Shizu tier limits were interesting, it was just way too dominant and it felt like it was really killing locals for a lot of people. But with this latest list, it feels like almost anything is going to be able to see success this format, so there's a lot of people hoping that their deck of choice is going to be really strong. I don't know guys, between this ban list and my Dallas Mavericks trading for Kyrie Irving, I don't know if I can take any more surprises this week, but it will be interesting to keep an eye out over the next couple of weeks to see just how the market reacts. We have a ton to cover and we're not going to get to everything in today's episode, so expect another episode later this week for us to get through everything, and let's get started. Alright, so to kick things off, we're taking a look at Kashtira Fenrir. So I actually did have this card ready to talk about over the weekend, as this card did have a very notable price dip with the release of OTS Tournament Pack 21. Before, it only had the one ultra rare printing in Darkwing Blast, but OTS 21 actually is an additional printing, and theoretically all of the Kashtira players who were looking to pick up ultis now had extra ultra rare copies that they could offload, and because of that the price of Fenrir had dropped from $70 down to around $50 to $55. However, with the ban list, that was definitely short-lived, as with the hits to tier limit and Sprite, Kashtira are looking like they're going to be the best deck of this upcoming format. Kashtira has remained completely untouched, and I think that a lot of people assumed that we were going into a triangle format with tier limit, Sprite, and Kashtira, but obviously tier limit and Sprite suffered significant losses. Because of this, we have seen Fenrir jump right back up to where its price was before the sudden drop, as it has rebounded right back to the $70 mark. Hopefully you guys were able to snag some cheap Fenrirs during that brief little window there, but if not, hopefully you can pull some ultis. If Kashtira really is going to be the best deck this format, this card should stay pretty steady at around the $70 mark, especially when you consider that Fenrir is still a very strong splashable card that a lot of other decks can use. Even if Kashtira is to underperform, don't expect this card to drop any lower than the $50 that we saw it at temporarily, at least not until it gets its eventual reprint. The next card that we're looking at is the Bestial Lubellion, and this is a card that now carries a crazy price tag of $100. The Bestial archetype is something that has seen a lot of competitive play, but as more as just a series of hand traps rather than a cohesive engine. For the most part, players aren't too familiar with the Bestials other than using them as hand traps and then linking them off, and of course using Magnamut to search for Druids or Mercenary. However, the Bestials are actually really strong, providing free bodies and interruptions, and even though tier limits will have a significantly reduced role in the upcoming format, the Bestials will still be quite strong. Specifically, I'm looking at two potential decks that can use the Bestial cards, those being Bestial Branded and Dragon Link. Now, each of these decks were previously very strong, but get a big boost because tier limits and Sprites were hit, while neither of those decks lost any tools. And yes, the Bestial monsters are harder to use with Kashtira banishing a lot of cards, but the Bestials can still banish lights and darks from their own graveyard in order to get bodies onto the field. Lubellion is the boss monster for the Bestial archetype, searching for any Bestial monster and then pulling a branded spell or trap card out of the deck. It seems like a lot of players also believe that a more significant Bestial engine will be strong this format, as we have seen this card's price surge from $65 or $70 to now being $90 to $95 a piece. That's right, this card is almost at $100 for a single copy. It's impossible to say so early on whether or not this card is actually going to be good. As far as I can tell, the format is wide open, and we're going to have to just wait until the next couple of big events to see what the best decks of the upcoming format are going to be. If Bestials are actually able to perform, then it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to see this card stay at like $90 to $100, but if it flops, then this card should go back down to around $60 to $70. Either way, don't expect this card to be reprinted for about another half a year, until approximately the 2023 Megatins. So this was an unexpected one. When I first saw this card pop up on my Facebook feed, I thought it was a joke, but apparently Bujinki Ahashima is a card that a lot of people are looking for to use in Sprite. This is a somewhat generic Link 2 monster, requiring its materials to be of the same level, but effectively it lets you conduct a Link summon using a monster from each your hand and graveyard. Now without Ronin Totem, Sprite had a bit of a harder time making Totally Awesome, and had to depend on Sprite Elf reviving Swap Frog in order to make it. However, with Sprite Elf now banned, a Hashima is the link to that people are turning to be able to get out Toad, since you can still use Gigantic Sprite to summon Swap Frog out of the deck, dump another copy to the graveyard, and then use Swap Frog's own effect to bounce it back to the hand. Now unfortunately, a Hashima has a bit more of a difficult condition to meet than Sprite Elf, since you can't use Gigantic Sprite to make a Hashima, but the lines are definitely still workable. Now because of this, a Hashima has skyrocketed. This was a $5 card for the last several months, but out of nowhere it shot up to $20 a piece. I think that for a while people did want $25 or $30, but fortunately it has cooled down just a little bit. This card only has one ultra rare printing from back in Dual Overload, which came out back in 2020. Hopefully this card will get a reprint in either an OTS tournament pack or a reprint in Maze of Memories that will make the card much more accessible. Until then though, we'll have to see just how much hype there is for Sprite, and if Sprite are still able to compete with Kashtira this upcoming format, to see just how in demand a Hashima is going to be. Either way, expect the price to cool back down to anywhere from $10 to $15 as some of the initial hype for the card cools off and people list their copies back gradually onto the market. Up next is a card that I have talked about a ton on Market Watch before. It seems to keep on bouncing up and down depending on the format. This is Rite of a Ramazir. So I think we actually talked about this card just a couple of weeks ago, and at that point I believe it was only around $40. However, Rite of a Ramazir has spiked in price with the most recent ban list reveal, as the Adventurer token engine is very popular with Kashtira. The Kashtira archetype doesn't put up very many negates, so in pure Kashtira, it's somewhat easy to shut down the deck with an Evenly Matched or a Book of Eclipse. However, the Adventurer token engine actually allows you to put up an Omni Negate in the form of Griffin Rider, which could be the difference between winning and losing the game. On top of that, you could choose to play Illegal Knight as well, another piece of the engine that is a level 7, which means it could be used either as an interruption or as an Xyz material, since the Kashtira extra deck consists primarily of rank 7 Xyz monsters. So because of this, we've seen yet another spike in the price of Rite of a Ramazir, as it has only one accessible printing as an ultra rare from Grand Creators, and that card is now up to between $55 and $60 per copy. Obviously this is a crazy price tag, but if Kashtira ends up being the best deck of the upcoming format, then its price will definitely be justified. However, I would still definitely be wary about picking up too many copies of this card. I feel like it's about due for a reprint, as we've seen the card surge in price time and time again, so it will definitely be on Konami's radar as a reprint target. I think it would make the most sense for this card to be reprinted in Maze of Memories, a side set that looks like it's carrying a ton of other much needed reprints, such as Baron de Fleur, Guardian Chimera, and Spellbook of Fate, though of course whether or not it's actually in there is anybody's guess. So with every list, there's always some small cleanup changes that don't really feel like they're going to make an impact. With this list, we had Jet Synchron, O-Lion, Yatagarasu, and Destrudo all going from 1 to 3, and none of those changes are really going to be doing anything. The one that might have the potential to do something is Servant of Endymion going from 1 to 3 as well, as Servant was a really useful card in certain Pendulum decks. Basically, if you activated 3 other spells, Servant gave you access to Jackal King, a Pendulum monster that was basically a free monster effect negation. This meant that it was much easier to play through Nibiru or Gamma, and you were also able to set up stronger boards when you're going first. Now, I'm not saying that Servant going to 3 is going to make Valence or any other Pendulum deck significantly better, but I'm simply noting it here because with a lot of players being a big fan of Pendulum decks, it's a card that a lot of players will probably be looking for, especially those that picked up their decks while Servant was at 1 and now need to grab 2 more copies. If you guys still have them, the card has just 1 super rare printing from an OTS tournament pack, and those are going to be about $5 each, but then the commons from the structure deck are still only 50 cents as well. If you have some lying in your bulk, definitely dig them up and bring them to your locals. Hopefully you'll be able to trade them to someone who's looking for 2 extra copies for something that's more worth holding on to. So this is actually another card that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It is Ohime, the Manifested Makanko. So at this point, I think it's fair to say that we judged Amazing Defenders a little bit too early. We all disregarded the set as being a complete bust because it just looked like all of the archetypes were so bad. However, it turns out that with the new support in Cyberstorm Access, Pearly is a top tier deck, and now after a bit more testing and experimentation, the Makanko theme seems to make for a really good engine. I think that it's Jesse Cotton who pushed a lot of people to look deeper into the Makanko archetype over on his channel, and that caused an initial surge where the card jumped in price from being 20 to 25 up to 30 to 35. Now, however, the card has jumped yet again with the most recent ban list, and it's now between $45 and $50 on TCG Player for a single copy. Now, I'm not particularly familiar with how the engine works post-ban list. In Jesse's video, he talked about it and a lot of its interactions with tier limits. However, I can definitely see how you could maybe use Mikanko as a filler engine in tier limits now, given how many cards tier limits lost, or maybe just taking advantage of the fact that this engine generates you card advantage and lets you get key cards into the graveyard, which is something that I think a lot of different decks can take advantage of. Anyways, as this card is brand new and in such high demand, I think it shouldn't surprise anybody to see how high this card's price is. We definitely shouldn't expect this card to be reprinted anytime soon. With the format so wide open, it'll definitely be interesting to see if something like Libromancer Mikanko is able to see success this upcoming format. The final card we have for today is another unexpected one. It is Welcome Labyrinth. So if you've been paying attention, this is a card that has been trending upward over the last few months, particularly because of the OCG. For a while, it looked like Labyrinth had established itself as a top tier deck over in the OCG, as the deck saw a considerable amount of competitive success. Recently, however, it seems that the deck has kind of fallen off as the game has turned more back towards tier limits, as well as other decks such as Pearly, Tri-Brigade, and Bystials. However, that hasn't stopped people from thinking that Labyrinth might still be a top tier deck here in the TCG. We just had Big Welcome Labyrinth come out in Photon Hypernova, and that's a really welcome new addition to the deck that provides you another summon as well as an interruption. And of course, the deck can do some cool things like main decking Lava Golem and Skill Drain to help with certain matchups. Now, even though Welcome Labyrinth was already trending upwards, I think that people thought we might have to wait for another list or two before Labyrinth would be able to do anything, as tier limits were expected to survive another format. Tier limit made it really difficult to play Labyrinth, since they could pop or spin all of your cards so easily, and they could use the shuffle backs to put back your Welcome Labyrinth or your monsters. However, with Ishizu tier limits hit so hard, it looks like Labyrinth might be able to do something after all. Because of this, Welcome Labyrinth has shot way up in price once again and now sits at $50 per copy. Now, there are a couple of unverified sellers at the time I'm making this video listing this card at like $40 to $45, but I can actually see several sales or sold listings right now at the $50 mark. I really hope that the deck does well. I had turned to Ishizu tier limit just because I wanted to play something a bit stronger in the format, and my locals happen to have a lot of Ishizu tier limits, which made playing Labyrinth really difficult, but I'm hoping to jump back on that Labyrinth train. As a brand new archetype, don't expect the cards to get any cheaper anytime soon. However, between the Runic and Labyrinth archetypes, if you can find places that are offloading Tactical Masters for relatively cheap, now might actually be a really good time to go ahead and crack them open. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. I think that the ban list was a really hard hit to tier limits, but it was definitely necessary. It felt like there were a lot of players, even like just at my local area, that didn't want to go to locals because they didn't want to have to put up with playing against Ishizu tier limits so often. And there was just like this huge power gap between Ishizu tier limits and then everything else, right? But thankfully now, the format is much more wide open, so it'll be really interesting to see what other decks are actually able to do, and of course see how those changes are going to affect the market. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure that you let me know by slamming that thumbs up button. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards we talked about today, and let me know what other cards are trending on the market so I can cover them in future episodes as well. Also, if you haven't already, make sure that you guys hit that subscribe button, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.